Hello everyone, it's a real pleasure to be here today, and I thank Mark for his introduction. I also thank 3 of our fellow union members. As impressive as it is to talk to 400 of you, it takes a bit of courage to come up and talk about some of your personal challenges. So to hear about a stevedore who's working, delivering the productivity of this nation, but doesn't have security of employment, it does make the blood boil. To hear about someone who's been injured at work, through no fault of their own, but has to go through the demeaning serf-like status of trying to beg to get what is rightfully theirs, when in fact they would rather they'd never been injured at all, that takes guts. To hear someone talk about the idea that you're willing to take a pay cut and serve others, but you get treated very poorly, that makes the blood boil. So this is an important meeting. When Unions New South Wales extended the invitation for me to come here to talk about some matters of relevance to union members in New South Wales, I thought, how would I start this talk? Because I'm not here seeking to say that, to talk about the politics in Canberra in itself, as important as that is. I want to instead talk to you about what I see happening, courtesy of the O'Farrell government and Conservative governments at the state level, and also what a federal coalition may do, if elected. I want to also talk to you about what has been happening to improve and extend and maintain the rights of working people, workers in Australia, from the national level. But most importantly, I want to give you a report about why we need to put end to this myth, this fairy tale, that trade unionism in Australia has no future. So the first thing I wanted to do to you is to report to you, and no doubt this will be reported in the pages of the Financial Review, that friend of the working man. I am a life member of a trade union. I am pro-union, and I'm proud of it, and I say it every day. To me, this card represents a whole lot of good things. A whole lot of good things from the past, a whole lot of lessons that a whole lot of members taught me, so I never forget where I come from. And this also tells me that whilst we have a vibrant, free, independent, democratic, honest trade union movement, which we do, then there's a lot of hope for the best country on earth. That is why I'm proud to be a life member of an Australian trade union. But just before any elements of the Conservative press say, see, it's a conspiracy, I am pro-union and I'm pro-business. I'm pro-Australia and I'm pro-family and I'm pro the effort that people make every day. So when they report that Minister Shorten said he's a life member of a union, also you put in that newspaper report, if you choose to, that I believe that Australian trade unions and Australian trade unionists working in harmony with their employers create the wealth of this nation and ensure the fair national distribution of the hard efforts of this nation. I know that a modern trade union movement does not stand for conflict's sake. I know that our members want to go to work and return home safely. I know that members of the Australian trade union movement stand up for others so that they may return home safely. I know that Australian trade unionists would seek harmony in the workplace, would seek engagement, would seek control over the tasks they do. Employees in this country want their employers to do well. Employees in this country want to see their companies and their operations be successful. They just want to make sure that they get a fair go at work. Now, this is the story that we're here today about, because you here understand that unless you stand up for other people, this country won't be the best country on earth. Now, I said to you that I wanted to report to you about some of the challenges to this. Sometimes the Labor government or the trade unions or the Labor Party are accused of scaring people about the opposition, saying, oh no, they've learnt their lessons from work choices, trust us, trust them, we can't even find them. They never debate workplace relations. They are on a witness protection program, they never talk about workplace relations nationally. But the problem for the federal coalition is that the state government in New South Wales, the state government in Victoria, the state government in Queensland, the state government in West Australia, they've given the game away. So you don't have to trust what someone says about its work choices as dead, buried, cremated. Have a look at some of the new zombies being created in industrial relations in New South Wales. And the list I couldn't have dreamed up this list before the last election and said that Barry O'Farrell and the New South Wales government would do this to workers. I couldn't have dreamed this list up. So in fact, when you go through this list, could I have dreamed up that the O'Farrell government would freeze the wages of public sector workers? I couldn't. If I had said that, even I would have thought, perhaps exaggerating a bit. Freeze the wages? Could I have dreamed up the idea they've said that they will take away the right to arbitration on wage disputes for state public sector workers? I couldn't have dreamed that up. Stephen King couldn't have dreamed that up. But even worse, and that's why I was moved by the courage of one of our speakers, is I could not have dreamed up that any government, I don't care if you're red, blue, green, whatever, would say that we're going to cut the benefits of injured workers. That is wrong. It is never right when anyone does that. I sincerely mean this, but the idea that all of a sudden your medical expenses should stop at a certain point after your injury is a gross act of political and public negligence. I know people who've lost their arms in conveyor belts. I know people who've been bullied at work. I've stood alongside people who've been stressed out. I've stood alongside widows of their husbands who were killed in a foundry. I know that bad things can happen. I also know that when you have a permanent impairment, the limb does not grow back. The sight does not return. The stress does not automatically go. The human body does not work to an actuarial workers' comp liberal time clock. When they can cure people of their injuries, then we can have a discussion about benefits. But until they can cure people of their injuries, get out of the way and stop injuring people a second time. It is wrong. And what I have to report to you is disappointing is when I raise this in the federal parliament, the opposition either smirk or they say it's not us. Well, I have to tell you, they won't reveal their policies, so what better evidence do we have than the policies of what Liberals do when they get into power? It goes further, and this list does deserve telling. This is why being a delegate is so important. The Labor movement and workers will never own all the newspapers and all the television stations, and that's as it is. But sometimes our story does not always get the hearing it deserves. So that is why we need delegates to go from here and to tell these stories. When someone says to you this Christmas, oh, well, they're all right, the Libs, they're all right. Yeah, they're all right so long as you don't get hurt. They're all right so long as you're not a public sector worker. They're all right so long as you don't get exposed to asbestos. They're all right so long as you are not a policeman, or a police person, I should say, and you suffer either your family of the policeman that he dies or there is a severe disability. You're all right so long as nothing bad ever happens to you. But that is not the Australia that we live in. That is not the Australia we want for our kids. What they are doing when they get into power is the only idea they have, their only vision for Australia is, you're on your own. You sort it out yourself. Now, I know Australian workers. I've done 1,000 enterprise agreements and I've visited 10,000 work sites. I know Australian workers are resourceful. I know they can sort out issues. But periodically in life, there are some situations where you just need a hand. Not because you are mentally feeble, not because you are not smart, not because you are not complex, not because you can't handle situations generally, but sometimes there are issues which require support. And I can think of no greater issue where you require support than when you get hurt at work, or when you have a government who doesn't say what they do before they get in and then freeze wages or privatise jobs and get rid of your conditions. That is not the contract that Australians have with the politics of Australia. But when I look at the other things that they do, and there's just a list. Oh, the Liberals will not talk about public holidays nationally. The state governments all want 11 public holidays, no more. But when we write back to them and say, which one do you want to cancel? You know, it's like you've ever been on the phone and the other person's hung up, you're going, hello, hello, anyone there? They don't answer. They say, I got the wrong number, bye-bye, it's not us. We know that they're compelling people to work on public holidays. We also know, Australian trade unionists and Australian people generally, we know that the most important thing that we can give our kids is a good education. We know ourselves that the idea of a job for life is an elusive prospect, more likely for our parents and our grandparents than it was for us. So what we know is that the best form of job security is good education, and it doesn't just stop when you leave school. We know the importance of TAFE. Not everyone's going to go to university. We know the importance of TAFE. So what is it that Barry O'Farrell doesn't know when he takes away the conditions of 13,000 TAFE teachers? What is it that Ted Baillieu knows when he cuts $300 million from TAFE? The Liberal policies on education are a bit like burning books for literacy. It doesn't work. It doesn't work, and it's selling short our kids. But also, when we look at issues about fairness in the workplace, how about that issue of equal pay? Men and women should get paid the same for doing the same work and for work of equal value. What's so hard to work out about that? The federal government has said, we will do this. When we were elected, we put in a law enabling unions to make a case for equal pay. The ASU and other unions made this case. In the community sector services area, where they said that because there's a high preponderance, the case was more complex than this, but in essence it said that there's 120,000 out of 150,000 people in the health and in the community services area, and because there are so many women in it, essentially they just never got the same deals, not the same access to bargaining, not the same wage outcomes. And a Labor government, when the decision came down, the feds have said we will pay our share, because we don't think that men and women should be treated differently in this country. We gave women the vote. We didn't give it, they received it many, many years ago. But they're still not getting paid the same. They're still not getting paid the same. But under our Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, and the laws which she passed and we supported, women are going to get the same deal as men in the community services sector. That's a good thing. I've spoken perhaps at some length about the misdemeanours of what the state governments are doing, but let me tell you, the federal opposition are definitely back in the naughty corner and they're definitely playing up. And I've got some tests. They say, oh, we won't do work choices again, we got it wrong. Don't you love it when they say we went too far and we're sorry? That's not going to make up for the penalty rates that got cut, for the shift allowances that got cut, for the people who got the wrong deal in terms of saying, there's never any debate about, well, if we got it wrong, what's our responsibility to fix it? Oh, no. But what is interesting is after 2 years, we're beginning to flush them from under their rocks about their workplace relations policies. We put up a law. The law says for fair entitlements that if a company becomes insolvent, that if you've got a redundancy agreement certified, if you've got your holiday pay, if you've worked for the company for 20 years and there's your long service leave, if the workers can't get the money from the company, there'll be a safety net, a statutory safety net. And we put that up. It's been the administrative system, but you know what the Liberal Party did? They turned up to Parliament and said, oh, we're not voting for that. I said, you've got to be joking. I said, you're going to vote against protecting workers' entitlements? I said, oh, well, it's not fair. It's not fair. It should be capped at 16 weeks. That's all you should get. Well, I said, what if someone's worked in an auto components company for 20 years, they've got a 2.5, 3 week per year redundancy agreement? Oh, well, that's not our problem. But do you know what's interesting about the Libs? They didn't propose that banks should rank behind workers. Oh, no. They weren't actually saying the workers should get a fair deal in some other mechanism. They just said we're voting against it. And when they couldn't get their 16-week cap up, they tried to amend the resolution, they voted against it. So when people say to you the Libs have learnt their lessons, just say, well, just be grateful that you've got a Labor government passing laws and that the opposition don't have the numbers. But it goes further than that. And I know there are people here from the power industry and the forests. I know there are people here who work in public sector. When Labor was elected in 2007, we passed some laws which said that if your job is being transmitted to a new employer, it should be done so on the same terms and conditions. What's so unreasonable about that? But one loophole has been the state public sector. So in the last 3 or 4 weeks of Parliament, and partly due to the lobbying of Unions New South Wales and Mark Lennon, we put up a law to fix this loophole. See, I have a view that if you've worked in the power industry, if you've worked in the forests, if you've worked in the hospitals, and a Liberal government, and one of the reasons you get paid what you get paid as opposed to perhaps a different or a better wage is because of the promise of job security. Over the years, that's been part of the bargain. But what happens is that under the current laws of the loophole, you could be transferred. On Friday, you could be wearing a badge of a government entity. On Monday, you turn up wearing a badge of the new entity, lower terms and conditions. Well, stuff that. What we've done... What we did is put up a law saying if you're going to be transferred within 3 months, if you're re-employed, it's on the same terms and conditions. That's all. And it's to a national employer, because why should there be some national employers who buy businesses off the private sector have to pay a higher tariff, and the public sector you don't have to pay the same tariff? We just think that the terms and conditions that you and your unions have negotiated, that you've inherited, you've worked for, I always believe there's been a bit of an index price where part of the trade-off's been job security. That's why public sector workers perhaps haven't had some of the big money in some of the private sector operations, because of job security. But if you get a government who comes in and says, without warning, we're going to change that, well, you know what? You should have the same terms and conditions. What is interesting now is I think that's a reasonable argument. The opposition voted against it. But as we have done on most of our 400 bills, 400 laws we put in, we win by 1 vote. It's a bit exciting, Parliament, so imagine your football team winning by 1 goal every game. It's a little tense, but it's 400-0. Now, some people will attack me and say, oh, you're using rhetoric, class warfare. I'm not using class warfare. I don't believe in class warfare. I just think that people who work for a living should get a fair go. That's not class warfare. Class warfare is when you insist that workers get second-class rights in this country. That is why this government, and when people at Christmas time and you barbecue, if you just barely tolerate your brother-in-law or sister-in-law, I'm sorry if any of your brother and sister-in-laws are in the same meeting here. We'll sort that out later. Here's a simple list of what we've done. Securing public sector workers' entitlements, tick. Outworkers, better protection than ever before, tick. Long-distance truck drivers, now having a system which will determine safe rates, making the roads safe for all of us. We've done that. We're the first people to say there should be a national plan to take all asbestos out of buildings by 2030. Federally, we're the first people to set up a national asbestos agency. Tick that. We're the ones who've increased superannuation from 9 to 12%. So the next 7 years, people will have more money to retire on than they otherwise would. And I just wish that the Howard government had done what we did so that people in their 50s and 60s now would have more saved. But anyway, in fact, I wish Robert Menzies had done what Bob Hawke and Paul Keating did in the 1980s and 1960s, then there would be enough money. But the point is, we've increased superannuation. We've also made sure that people get the opportunity to have equal pay, but we've also done a couple of other things I think are worthy of mention. One is, we are proposing to create a national disability insurance scheme. That'll mean that people who have profound and severe disabilities get lifetime care, packages of support which they and their families will control. It is about time that we stood up for people with disabilities and their carers and their families and brought them out of exile back into our country. I said what we've done, but I think we need to give a bit of credit to someone who's done it. We know that good leadership is fundamental to the direction of this nation. And we know, and I know firsthand, that our Prime Minister Julia Gillard, working with the government and the Labor government, have done great things. And I do also wish to put this on the record. I do not believe there is any truth in any of the baseless smear campaigns against our Prime Minister. The campaign currently run against her is grubby. It relies upon a self-confessed fraudster, and there still hasn't been any specific allegation made. We know in this union movement we're an honest movement. We do know periodically 1 or 2 or 3 will do the wrong thing in the union movement, and we will move those people on, and that is not the conduct of the Australian trade union movement. I know there's nearly 2 million of us who are members of unions. I know that representatives of the unions and their officials work very hard. I do not accept the proposition that the union movement is going down the wrong track. And what I do think is inappropriate is when you have the conduct of the few, be it 20 years ago or in recent times, doing the wrong thing by union members. Now, that is inappropriate. What I also think is inappropriate is when credibility is given to these people who've done the wrong thing by those in the opposition as if these people are now saints. I know this union movement and this Labor movement is focused on the best interests of working people and the whole Australian economy. I understand, like you understand, that the union movement is not above the law and is not something special. But I also understand that it is the people who join the unions. I understand it as the representatives such as you here who stand up and make the workplace better. I cannot imagine where we would be without the contribution of you, the people before you, and the people who come after you. Just think about it. Mandatory compulsory superannuation, support for immigration after the Second World War, shorter hours, the 40-hour week, the 38-hour week, the idea that people should get long service leave, the idea that we should have safe workplaces. I know the modern Australian trade union movement believes in productivity, but do you know what we define as productivity? Stop wasting our time. Stop sending us to meetings with no meaning. Stop giving us control freaks and hierarchies above you, controlling information, making themselves feel good when you know what to do and you can get on and do it. And if you want to have productive workplaces, make them safe workplaces. If you want to have productive workplaces, get rid of the bullies. If you want to have safe workplaces, pay us properly and let us get on with the job that we're paid to do. I have complete optimism in the future of this country. We know that we're living longer than ever before. We know that we need to smooth our wealth and make sure we have enough to retire on. We know that we'll have more than one job in our lives and our kids will have 6 or 7 or 8 and they need the best skills possible. I also know that we just don't live to work, that in fact that the sum of us is more than just our jobs. But I also know fundamentally that a good job is one where you have a regular set of hours, where you get reasonable pay, where you're safe, and ideally where you've got a good union representing you in the workplace. Let's keep fighting for the issues that matter to all Australians. Thank you very much.